So, picture this. It's exactly 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. Yeah, work night. And just as I'm finally dozing off, the bass drops like a wrecking ball through the walls. I mean, I sat straight up in my bed, blinking like I was imagining things. Nope. Not a nightmare. Not a random truck outside. It was my neighbor, the one who apparently thinks everyone in the building wants to party at dark 30. There's this moment where you just can't believe someone can be that inconsiderate. Like, who blasts music so loud in the middle of a week when the entire building works the next day? The bass was shaking the ceiling, the floor. Some poor spider probably fell off his web. I'm staring at the wall like, seriously? What planet are you living on? And then it got me thinking. You know how sometimes neighbors are just these little mysterious aliens you tolerate? But how far would you actually go when the noise just won't quit? When all the polite knocks and, hey, could you maybe turn that down? Texts fail? When you're so sleep-deprived, the only thing keeping you sane is daydreaming about revenge, but, like, mildly funny revenge? Not a straight-up feud to break the internet, but definitely something that would make for a great story later on. So yeah, that night was my breaking point. The music was cranking, my brain was short-circuiting, and I realized this wasn't just going to be a one-off battle of wills with my neighbor, it was shaping up to be a full-blown war. Alright, so here's the deal with this neighbor of mine. Let's call him Dave. Dave's this guy who's got a serious passion for music, not just any tunes, but those crank up the volume until your walls rattle kind of beats. And I'm not just talking weekends or special occasions. No, Dave loved to play DJ for the entire building and, well, his favorite time was basically all the time. At first, it was kind of subtle. A little bump here and there, something I thought I could easily power through. I work in tech, which means sometimes my job demands I be sharp and focused by 7 a.m. every day. So sleep isn't exactly optional for me, it's more like a precious resource I guard fiercely. But when your neighbor's idea of background music sounds like a live festival happening 10 feet from your window, well, that peaceful sleep thing? Yeah, it kind of blows up pretty fast. I remember that first knock on Dave's door like it was yesterday. I figured, hey, maybe he doesn't realize how loud the music actually is. So I took the elevator up, rehearsing a calm, friendly tone in my head. Something like, hey man, sorry to bother you, but would you mind turning it down a notch? Simple, right? Except, when I got there, Dave was nothing like I imagined. He was mid-headbang, headphones around his neck, and this big grin plastered on his face like he was in his own party bubble. He paused the music just enough to say, oh hey dude, yeah sure, I'll keep it down, with this exaggerated wink. Which sounded good, until 2 nights later when the bass was back and louder than ever. I sent the polite texts too. You know, the classic, hey Dave, hope you're well. Quick favor, could you please lower the music during the week? I have to get up early. Nothing harsh, just genuine. But those messages seemed to vanish into thin air. Or at least, that's how it felt. Because music was still blasting like I was front row at a concert. Some evenings, I caught other tenants muttering about it while we all tried to ignore the unintentional beat drop that kept interrupting conversations in the hall. A lady from down the hall, Mrs. Jenkins, who's usually as sweet as apple pie, was on the verge of tears complaining how her cat was acting like it was under attack. Another tenant, a guy named Mark, work-from-home type, started parking his car for hours just to escape the noise because his tiny apartment turned into a nightclub. Now, you might think the apartment manager would be the hero here, right? The person who'd wave a magic wand and put an end to all the bass-induced misery? Ha! Nope. When I brought up the issue to Mr. Carlson, the manager, he just sighed and said, Dave's a long-term tenant. We've warned him before, but you know, it's complicated. Like he was trying to solve world peace, not a loud neighbor problem. I'm telling you, dealing with the manager was like talking to a wall thicker than my apartment ceilings. Every time I'd think, all right, this time maybe things will change, I'd leave the office with the same vague promise of intervention and the same loud music echoing back to me down the hall. But here's where it gets interesting. Or, well, more complicated. One night, after the usual cacophony of thumping beats, I finally ran into Dave in the hallway. This was probably a mistake because, frankly, I was exhausted, borderline grumpy, and not exactly ready for a chat. I blurted out, hey man, what's the deal? We all have early mornings. Can you at least keep it down during the week? And Dave just looked at me, no music playing, this weirdly serious look replacing his usual party grin. Then he said something totally unexpected. Look, I'm training for something important. The music, it helps me focus. I blinked. Training? For what? Like a marathon? An exam? What's going on? He hesitated, then pulled out what looked like a pair of boxing gloves from his apartment. Yeah, boxing gloves. I'm a fighter, dude. This music is part of my prep. It's how I get into the zone. Suddenly, all these late-night beats made sense, but also didn't. Because sure, training for a fight is serious business, but playing music at ear-splitting levels at 2 a.m. On a work night, that still felt like overkill. I nodded slowly, trying to grasp this new layer to the situation, while my mind started ticking. Was there a way to meet halfway? Could I somehow respect his training routine and reclaim my sleep? I wasn't sure yet, but I knew one thing. The battle for peace in this building was far from over, and I was already drafting a plan in my head, though whether it would work was a whole other question. So, things went from annoying to downright chaotic pretty fast. Despite my talks with Dave and the manager's "will look into it" promises, which, let's be honest, sounded more like polite ways to say, not my problem, the music didn't just stay loud, it got louder. Like, at some point, the bass was less of a background rumble and more like a seismic event happening inside my apartment. What really threw fuel on the fire was when Mrs. Jenkins decided to approach me one evening. She's this tiny, sweet lady, retired, who usually smiled at everyone but now looked like she'd aged 10 years in a week from stress. She said, "I can't take it anymore. My poor little Whiskers is scared half to death. He hides all day, and I'm losing sleep too." I nodded, feeling a bit guilty that the cat was now somehow part of this mess. And Mark, the work-from-home guy? He stopped coming out of his apartment during peak base hours. I caught him once in the lobby looking like a zombie with an extra shot of caffeine. "I swear, man," he said, "I'm thinking of booking a hotel just to get a decent workday in." That's when it hit me. This whole building was suffering the consequences of Dave's late-night concerts. So, I decided to try the manager one more time. Mr. Carlson was leaning against the front desk, half reading a newspaper, half watching the parade of loud residents. When I brought up the complaints again, he gave a shrug that screamed, "Been there, done that." I get it, but Dave's got rights too, and we've spoken. Honestly, our hands are a bit tied unless multiple tenants file formal complaints. His voice was calm but defeated. At this point, I thought, fine, if the official channels are a dead end, maybe I need to get a bit creative. Then came the awkward hallway confrontation that really twisted the plot. One night after work, I caught Dave plucking on his headphones near the stairs, music off this time, and I figured now or never. I blurted, "Look, Dave, I get your training and all, but have you thought about how loud this gets? The whole building is feeling it." He looked up, and for a moment, the party boy mask dropped. He said, "You don't understand. This isn't just training, it's everything. This fight could change my life." Then he gestured to a beat-up photo tape near his door, a younger version of him standing in some dingy gym, gloves on, eyes fierce. I could see the determination in his eyes, but honestly, the late-night parties were wrecking my nerves. So, something had to give. Still, hearing his side sparked a mix of empathy and frustration. It was like staring at a messy puzzle where none of the pieces quite fit. How do you balance someone's dreams with the building's sanity? That's when the wheels in my head started turning. Instead of just complaining more, maybe I could figure out a way to meet him part way. What if I could help him train without feeling like my eardrums were under siege? I didn't have the exact plan down yet, but I was certain one thing. This wasn't going to be about just quieting Dave or forcing him out. There was something else at play, a bigger picture that needed a smarter kind of solution. Now, whether that plan would actually work or if it backfires spectacularly, well, let's just say I was about to find out. Alright, so here's how it all went down. I finally decided to put the plan into motion. I figured if Dave was hell-bent on his loud beats for training, then maybe it was worth trying to turn his own cranky volume against him. The idea was simple enough: borrow some portable speakers, amp up the noise right outside his door, but not to annoy him mindlessly, more like a carefully calibrated counterpulse. I called it Operation Bass Balance, which in hindsight sounded way cooler in my head than it actually played out. The night I launched the operation, I set up my little portable speaker facing his door and queued up some similarly bass-heavy tracks, just enough to create a sort of noise tug-of-war, you know? I wasn't out to blow out eardrums or start a war, just to rattle his groove enough that he might rethink the timing or volume of his sessions. At first, Dave was confused. I could hear footsteps pacing in the hallway, muffled grumbles, maybe even some head-scratching. Then he came out, looking less like the party king and more like someone who wanted to know what on earth was going on. I caught a glimpse of that serious spider glare again, the kind he reserved for his midnight jams. "Really?" he said, eyeing my setup. "You're gonna play loud music to fight my loud music?" I shrugged, trying to look casual but probably failing miserably. "Yeah, well, if the bass doesn't stop, at least we can have a little dance-off." And here's where it got interesting. Instead of exploding into an argument, Dave chuckled, this weird, almost grateful sound that caught me off guard. He said, "All right, I get it, man. Maybe I've been a bit excessive." We ended up talking right there in the hallway, something we hadn't done properly before. Turns out he was honestly stressed about the fight and didn't always realize how his routine affected others. I shared my perspective too. The sleep struggles, the other tenants, the creeping insanity of vibrating furniture. The next few nights, Dave dialed down the volume during the week, not completely silent, but definitely bearable. And in exchange, I agreed to keep the music counterattacks to a minimum, only if absolutely necessary. Eventually, I even shared some noise-canceling headphone tips to help him train without the whole building having to suffer the consequences. Now, did this totally solve the problem? Not exactly. The music still thumped here and there, just at healthier doses. It was less war zone and more uneasy truce. Plus, Dave and I had this mutual understanding that music was part of his life, but so was respecting his neighbors. So, we found a middle ground that, while imperfect, restored at least a semblance of peace in the building. Looking back, I wonder if all that noise and tension was really necessary to get to that point. Could I have just talked more up front, or maybe even offered some help without the sneaky speaker setup? Maybe. But sometimes, when you're stuck between a blaring bass and a desperate need for sleep, the path to compromise isn't exactly a quiet one. Either way, it made me realize that neighbors are weirdly complicated creatures. Messy, loud, occasionally frustrating, and surprisingly human beneath all the noise. And while the battle for the apartment's sanity didn't end with a complete ceasefire, it did end with something almost as good, a grudging respect born from a mutual understanding, and maybe just a tiny bit of shared musical warfare.